Hello, everyone. I've asked my panelists just to get comfy. Thank you so much for being here in Scottsdale. It is my privilege. I am very grateful to be having this next conversation. And Joel just set it up actually really well in talking about the need to include so many different voices and so many different perspectives in everything that we do. Diversity and inclusion is a fundamental part of the S part of the ESG that we always talk about, and we have a terrific group of panelists here to talk about that with us today. I'm honored to introduce Beric Alleyne. He is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion with eBay. Jyoti Chopra, and she is the Chief Diversity and Sustainability Officer, a double title, with MGM Resorts. And Kamillah Knight, and she is the Diversity and Inclusion Lead with Unilever NA, and she's also a 30 under 30 honoree from 2019. So thank you very much, all of you, for being here today. It is my honor to be hosting this conversation. I wanted to start with a context, and that is, when we talk about this D&I concept, what exactly does that mean? Does your company have an actual goal? Does it have a mission statement? And so I wanted each of you just to spend a moment just sort of talking about how your organization considers this. What is it, if there is a goal, what is it? And how did it get set? So who was involved in that conversation? I would love to start with Beric. I'm going to have to lean over to see you a little bit, but...
That's all right. No, great question. So let's go way back. eBay turned 25 years old this year. When this company was founded by Pierre Omidyar, he's a French-born Iranian-American. And he set up this platform to really provide economic opportunity and empowerment for everyone, regardless of their background or geographical location. So fast forward to 2016, when we formed an official D&I organization, this was already part of the company's mission. It is all about how do we create an organization that is the most diverse and inclusive place to work, to grow, to buy, and to sell for everyone. So it was a pretty easy alignment for us to make with how this company was even formed. So at eBay, that continues to be the company's mission, and it continues to be our mission to integrate D&I into the fabric of the work that we do, because it is the cornerstone upon which this company was built.
Just a quick follow-up. Does it apply also to your partners?
Oh, absolutely. And by partnership, just to clarify what I mean, even when we think about who we form partnerships with externally, whether it is around service providers, whether it is around the communities we partner with, it is part and parcel of how we think about this topic. It is integral to almost every function we perform.
Jyoti.
Yes, and building on Beric's excellent points, you'll hear this theme of integration. So at MGM Resorts International, inclusion is actually one of our 4 corporate company-wide values. And then what we have done as part of our social impact sustainability strategy, fostering diversity and inclusion is one of 3 central pillars. And to that, we've tied 2 very specific long-term goals out to 2025. And that is ensuring that all of our employees, for goal number 1, have equal access to leadership opportunities. And the second is ensuring 100% training across all of our management teams in and around inclusive practices, as well as our sustainability practices. So that's how we're sort of embedding across the enterprise diversity and inclusion at MGM.
So for Unilever, similar to what both Jyoti and Beric said, it's really baked into everything that we do and really creating that inclusive space within our walls. And honestly, we focus on building a cultivated and elevated relationship with our employees to make sure that they do have access to leadership and that they are able to progress in their careers. Whether that's through the trainings that we do, whether that's consulting with a D&I board, which has representation from all of our senior leaderships by function, whether that's consulting with HR functional leads to make sure that we're building the right strategies based on the things that we've heard from our employees and that we know that they need.
So I want to go back to the second part of my question, which was who set this goal? And how? And another thing I'm wondering about is how often it changes, right? Because I think the concept of diversity is one that probably ebbs and flows, and there may be certain things that are prioritized in certain fiscal years or whatever. I mean, how does that, again, let's go back to the people involved in the conversation. Is it the board, Jyoti?
Yeah, so at MGM, for example, it's been a very collaborative process. So typically what will happen is draft goals will be developed by the Center of Expertise, the diversity team, and then you need a process of socialization with the management and executive group to see, are the goals attainable? Do we need to make them more stretch goals? What's the time frame? Is it 1 year, 3 year, 5 years? How often do we want to revisit the goals? And then, in the case of MGM, we have a CSR committee of our board of directors, and so it would have been reviewed by our board of directors. And I think that's fairly typical in most publicly traded companies. And I think the last point I'll make is the more collaborative a process you can make it, the more likely you're going to develop a sense of shared ownership around the goals and then ultimately achieving them.
For anyone, what about external stakeholders?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Just given the core remit of our platform, we spend a significant amount of time cultivating external partnerships. And one that I am going to highlight, because it is in partnership with our impact team, which I think is very relatable to this group of people here today, we have formed what is called our Retail Revival Program. And it's all around how do we go into cities where we know there's a high concentration of small businesses, mom and pop shops, if you will, and help provide educational opportunities, help provide an understanding of what e-commerce is, and help leverage our reach globally to these smaller communities to bolster their business. So we're currently in about, I think, 9 cities. We're going into Austin, Texas next. And between partnerships with our government relations team, the impact organization, D&I, our executive team, we've been able to help educate almost 400 participants in this program, which has generated almost $20 million in GMV, gross merchandise value. And they're now doing business with 170 countries, things that they would not have been able to do previously. So partnerships is something we heavily rely on to do the work that we do when it pertains to D&I. And that's just on the external side. On the internal side, when it comes to education, when it comes to hiring and retaining diverse workforces, we can't do it all on our own. You know, so we leverage external partners all the time to really help enforce and embolden the work that we do, because sometimes we just don't know everything, and partners make us stronger.
I see lots of nodding. Kamillah?
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree with that. You know, externally, we partner with a lot of diversity partners to understand what's going on in the diversity and inclusion space outside of Unilever, as well as to bring them in to do, you know, anonymous surveying of employees to once again understand what are the needs of our employees, what are things that perhaps they're not as comfortable sharing with us that we can build programming on. Also working as we continue to amplify and grow our supplier diversity initiatives, working with our diverse suppliers or even non-diverse suppliers to understand what they're doing in the D&I space and what best practices we can share across.
Now, Jyoti, you have a dual title, as I alluded to before. What drove the decision by MGM to actually merge those roles, right? Because that's a good title. Why are they linked?
Yeah, so MGM has been fairly progressive in recognizing the importance of ESG, environmental social governance factors, its own positioning relative to ratings, rankings, indices, and the fact that we have a CSR committee of the board of directors. So there was a corporate restructuring about a year ago that actually led to, they were previously 2 separate departments. Sustainability was separate, and then diversity, inclusion, and philanthropy were a different unit. And the decision was made by management to bring them together under one cohesive unit with then centralized reporting and liaison into the CSR board of directors. And if you look at where the space is going, it's all about, to Beric's point, integration, integrated reporting, for example. And so I think the more uniformity you have, the more connectivity, the less silos you have, the better, especially in a practice like this.
Yeah.
Have you seen any particular benefits from that integration? Like, could you point to
Yes, I'll give you an example. Reporting. Previously, each of our areas, philanthropy, corporate social responsibility, sustainability, and diversity and inclusion, reported very differently and presented very differently and at different times of the year. We have now developed an integrated reporting model, which is also used for updates to management, updates to our board. The data is used for our submissions in public ratings and rankings submissions, and it's so much more efficient, it's much easier, and also I think it lends to a greater level of transparency across the practices.
What about resources? How does it affect resources?
I think you get more efficiencies because you're sharing practices, you're sharing knowledge, and I think from a career path perspective, it's really interesting. You can move from diversity, and I'm sitting next to somebody who was a former leader in sustainability that's now a domain expert leader, Kamillah, in diversity and inclusion. But it's a practice area that lends to moving from one area into the other. And I think it's a very dynamic career path. And I do think we're incredibly fortunate to have probably one of the best jobs in the world.
Yeah. Well, Kamillah actually was in supply chain before that, too, even. But you are currently part of the human resources. Yes. But when we were prepping for this, you talked to me quite a bit about the Sustainable Development Goals, right? And you see a very close alignment. Even though you don't have sustainability in your title, you see a very close alignment between what you're doing and how it could impact the companies standing there. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So I'll start by saying my purpose. My purpose is to be what I call a change superhero, because my daughter calls me a superhero. But what that means to me is I would like to be a change advocate in the sense of I want to change the way people interact with their environment, whether that's their physical environment or other people. So from that has built this whole entire journey for me at Unilever of really unpacking how all of these things really relate to one another, to really dig deep and get to my purpose or passion. So like you mentioned, I started in supply chain where I was doing more traditional sustainability type of work, but then moved to sales where it was a little bit less traditional and then kind of breached into diversity and inclusion. So making that journey really highlighted different sustainable development goals as well as different initiatives that Unilever was working on, and as well as me being tied and closely working with people made me understand how the two really do relate to one another. So for instance, if you think about SDG number 8, I believe it's the good workforce and economic growth. We do things like the work that we're doing behind disabilities, where we're changing things as simple as the way our decks look so that someone who's visually impaired can actually view them in a way that someone who doesn't have a visual impairment does. Or just as simple as the stairs in our building, putting certain markings on the stairs so once again someone who's visually impaired can go up the stairs and know when to step. And those things are directly correlated with SDGs, but it's something that we're doing in the D&I space. Or something like, I started a program about 3 years ago called the Leadership Development Institute, working with high school students. It was the first time that we as a company really did branch out our recruitment efforts as well as like some of the things that we're doing to high schoolers and really trying to lay a groundwork for them as they prepare to go to college or university or go into the workforce if they decide not to go to college. So they get to network with different EVPs as well as they work on a case study around a real Unilever issue and really do get hands-on skills and tools that traditionally only college students would get or only someone graduating from college would get. You could even think about something like the goal that's centered around reducing inequalities. And we do things in our office like we host different cultural immersions, which really and truly walk you through how a person who identifies with that specific group, so Black for instance, you walk through the history of Black Americans here in the United States and understand how slavery and the biases that are associated with Black people still exist today and still are rooted there. But then it takes a different approach in relating it back to the business to really draw people in, especially us being a very marketing forward business, and looking at how we're marketing to consumers and how do we need to connect to them. And that's something that really does help to reduce inequalities, or even just looking at our brands. There are several ways.
Any other thoughts from eBay or from MGM? Do you have an alignment? Do you get asked about?
I think it's an area of improvement for us. Where we have combined forces before in certain projects, they've been great, Retail Revival being one of those. But in terms of having it being something that's ongoing where there's a clear operating model, that's something we're working to get better at. But what we have seen is when we have partnered together on any initiative, it's been great with incredible results. I mean, just some of the numbers I would have quoted before, around $20 million in business done on our platform through these types of collaborations. We need to do more of those, 100%.
Okay. So I would love to go to Beric for the next question, actually. And I'm going to put myself out there a little bit. One of the things that I am challenged by, and I mentioned this to you when we had lunch, is sometimes I don't know what questions to ask. I don't know what it's appropriate to bring up. And clearly, employee engagement is integral to the success of this. So I'd love to hear some thoughts, Beric, starting with you, of particularly effective ways of working and engaging with your employees to help them know that it's okay to ask questions and to know that it's okay to have a dialogue. How do you get them really excited about moving forward?
Yes, it's interesting. So we've tested something that I believe we found huge success with, and it's all around immersive experiences. So if you provide a safe space and you give folks the latitude to ask all of the tough questions they would love to ask, but they usually only talk about these things around the family dinner table or at a bar with friends, but create that space in the workplace for people to have facilitated, safe conversations, you would be surprised how much empathy has grown coming out of these types of dialogues. We've launched a series called the Courageous Conversation Series, and that's what we've done. We opened up eBay's doors. We brought in folks who represent different parts of society who historically may have been a bit misunderstood, a bit misrepresented, and we created a space for eBay employees to ask these individuals any of the tough questions they always wanted to ask. So someone who's an ex-gang member, someone who is a black Muslim woman, someone who served in a war, someone who's conservative, someone who's liberal, someone who voted for Trump, somebody voted for Hillary, and we created this safe space for folks to just have these dialogues. And interestingly enough, even though we had security and ER in the room, just in case, we didn't need it. We didn't need it. And the energy, the buzz that was created in the room was infectious to the point where we launched it in San Jose in 2018, and since then, it's gone through 5 European cities. It's incredible. So just creating that space, and sometimes creating that safe space just means someone seeing you saying, hey, it's safe, and this isn't going on a performance review, we're not recording anything. And folks they want to have these dialogues, they want to engage. So creating that space, I think, has done wonders for us at eBay.
Yeah, just building on Beric's point, I think access is another important part of it. In my previous role at Bank of New York Mellon, one of the things we did was small group conversations. But with our chairman, CEO, president, members of our board who really cared and wanted to get underneath issues, understand what were potential roadblocks and barriers to advancement, and have courageous and open conversations, and were willing to be vulnerable and to listen and provide feedback and support on a consistent and sustained basis. And so we did small group, very intimate, informal sessions over a period of time, and I think that really helped break down a lot of barriers.
Anything to add?
I agree with everything you both said, but going even further than that, I think it's leveraging or amplifying the voices of our business resource groups, and we call them business resource groups for a reason, because they actually do relate back to the business, and when people see the impact on the business, they're more likely to engage them. So many of our business resource group do things like what Beric was talking about, hosting courageous conversations and opening the doors for people who identify in that space to talk to other people and allow them to come and ask them those questions.
Great. Okay. Sarah, we're ready for a question from the sidebar.
This conversation. Thank you all so much for this conversation. It's generating a lot of interest through everybody in the virtual audience and right here. One thing that people are wondering about, it's wonderful that your organizations have these initiatives baked into how you're thinking about your business already. And I don't think that's a luxury that all people have. And people are wondering how the employees can manage up when it comes to ensuring leadership really understands the value of equity and inclusion and diversity on a workforce.
So, yeah, I'm happy to start. I think one of the most powerful ways to engage your leadership is through immersive experiences. So take them along with you to events, programs, pull them into some of these smaller types of roundtable conversations. And that, I think, is often a very good way to get them involved. I don't think about it in terms of managing up, but I think about it in terms of shared ownership. You have to have both a top-down and a bottoms-up approach to problem solving and to fuel advancement up the pipeline. You've got to have this grassroots movement, but you've also got to have connectivity to leadership. And so I think about it, curating experiences through which you immerse your leaders to give them a sense of what's really going on the ground.
I think, once again, going back to business resource groups, it allows for employees who might not necessarily be a senior leader a platform in order to share their voice and in order to bring people along for the ride, as well as to partner with HR or with certain functions to actually make certain programming or trainings happen. So I'll give you an example. For instance, our Black Excellence at Unilever Business Resource Group partnered with the Diversity and Inclusion team to come up with the whole training around how managers manage people who look different or are different than them. And it's something we've piloted now that we're trying to cascade across the business that really came from the BRG and those employees.
Yeah, I think 100% it begins with dialogue. I think you have to be courageous, and if your organization doesn't have the support of a central D&I-like organization, I think the onus is on us a bit as employees of these institutions to force these conversations and to demonstrate, hey, this is important to the people who work here. And this is additive to the culture if we could get it correct. This is additive to the bottom line, to your point, Kamillah. So I think part of it is just being courageous. And to your point, what I think happens is leadership will start to recognize the criticality of getting this right as well. And that's where you get that beautiful gelling of both parties coming together, where it comes from top down. And senior level accountability is absolutely critical in all facets of this work, but you also get that grassroots organic movement, if you will, who will really help push the organization forward.
Right. Jyoti, how do you measure success?
So I think about it on two dimensions, quantitatively and qualitatively. And I'm really big on metrics because what gets measured really has a big impact and generates a lot of credibility. From a diversity inclusion perspective, there are really three main areas of measurement. You look at the composition of your workforce, you look at your hiring, so who's coming in the door, and then you look at your turnover, who's exiting. That gives you a very holistic picture of the demographics. You overlay onto that things like succession bench ratios, promotion rates, right? And so then you begin to build out a more robust measurement framework. On the qualitative side, looking at things, how are you doing in terms of ratings, rankings, indices, things like, are you in the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index, for example? So I think it's important to have a multidimensional framework. Employee engagement scores from your surveys, another important measure.
Any other additions to that one?
No, I agree with everything that was just said. What I would also add on there would be, there are some non-traditional ways you can measure success as well. So we look at, for example, the number of hours of volunteerism work as it pertains to D&I efforts. We look at how many senior leaders and what percentages of overall D&I spend are they contributing directly from their own budgets. So right now, we're just at about parity in terms of what funding the central D&I organization provides and what funding business leaders provide. We also look at things that how many folks are demonstrating interest in being kept in the loop of some of these cultural events that take place by simply just signing up the distribution list, because it shows a certain level of appetite for the organization to be more informed. And what I do think is 100% informative are those engagement surveys, because that's when you really start to see what is happening on the ground in mass, and it would give you a really strong indicator of how successful or unsuccessful some of the programs or initiatives might be for the people who work at that company.
Okay. We have time for one more wrap-up question, and I'm going to give it a two-parter. If you want to answer one and not the other, go for it. What has been your most humbling experience in this role, and what advice would you give to the sustainability professionals in this room about how to embed these imperatives into their strategy?
So for me, the most humbling experience is honestly going through the different immersions and trainings that we put on as a D&I team and realizing my own biases, even as a D&I professional, and understanding that everybody is on this journey together and we're all at different points, but we're all moving in the same direction. And then the advice that I would give you as you start to think about how to really implement D&I into your sustainability strategy or your strategy as a business is to really look at what are you already addressing with regards to the Sustainable Development Goals, and understanding how the different diversity groups are impacted by those goals will then help you to really build in that D&I to the work that you're already doing.
My advice to all of you, make this a shared collective agenda with relentless advocacy. It really takes a village, and this is a movement, and it's one that has to be nurtured and sustained over an extended period of time. Own it, lead it, contribute, make it a shared agenda.
I'm just going to make it a very short piece of advice. Over time, not overnight. That's it.
Thank you so much to this panel. They're continuing the conversation in a couple of hours, so I encourage you to join them again for your questions. But thank you so much for being with us today.